subtle and it's nuanced and it is difficult to walk. And I think that's why I try to say tough love because, when we're young, we may have certain ideas about the way we want our life to go, but then maybe our parents are not letting us do certain things and we think I know when I was a kid, when I was in fifth grade, I wanted to get my ear pierced. My mom wouldn't let me do it. And I
Yeah.
was, oh, come on, mom. I
Yeah.
thought it was so cool. And then 2 years later, I'm like, thank you, mom, for not
Yeah.
letting me get my ear pierced.
Yeah.
I think it comes from a place of good intention
Yeah.
that they have asked themselves that question, right? That they've been inquiring in why not this crypto asset or this crypto asset. And they've done the exploration. They keep coming back to Bitcoin and they've seen people being taken advantage of. But to your point, it's like this tough love can become detrimental, just like the immune system can become detrimental, right? It can overreact and it can actually harm the human body. So I would say that it's such a tricky and nuanced topic that even biology hasn't figured it out, right? A lot of people have autoimmune diseases. Um, and then there's the other thing that we have this natural. I agree with you about love. I think love is like the deepest value. That's a whole nother philosophical thing, but it's we're biologically programmed to pay more attention to things that are adversarial or harmful, right? Mm-hmm. That's part of us protecting the meat suit, so to speak. So there is some maybe better delivery method by being a little bit toxic to really get the point across. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, don't get lost over here. These things can hurt you. Really try to focus on Bitcoin. But the toxicity of that message, I guess it increases its ability to penetrate the individual, but it can also go too far. So it is
it's interesting, but I almost to push back a little bit. Toxicity is a funny word. I think maybe another way to say it is I brought up like Christopher Hitchens and somebody who, like, okay, you might say is toxic or something like that because he's basically a intellectual powerhouse who's also a troll. So he's constantly, it's like guerrilla warfare in the space of ideas. He's very harsh in his disagreements and criticisms, but it's done with incredible grace and skill and poetry. So
we could use more of that.
We could use more of that. So toxicity, just like, these are just words. They can mean a lot of different things, but disagreement doesn't have to be done with love, but it should be done with skill if it's to be effective. So there's a lot of ways to be effective in guerrilla warfare, but you want to learn how to shoot or whatever the weapon you're using and to do it well. Some people do it better than others, and it's worthwhile to learn to do it well. Again, I prefer love, but even love, just because you think you're communicating a good idea, which you very well may be, doesn't mean it also doesn't require skill to do the communication well. Whether it's disagreement and harsh or more agreement and loving and so on.
Yeah, I think very fundamentally that all of our decisions, we alluded to earlier that every decision is an expression of value, right? Every action we take, they ultimately come from fear or love. Fear would be something much more in the biological domain where it's like we're trying to protect ego, we're trying to behave selfishly. This is the domain of sin, I don't know all the sins, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, lust, pride, envy, like these are all selfish behaviors. Whereas something like love it's morally superior in that it's more selfless. I don't know that we can properly define love with words at all, but I would say maybe like selfless action could be kind of a generalization of it. And in that way, it is really hard. To your point, it's hard to love in a world that has a lot of conflict that might make you fearful if you're really focused on your meat suit. But if you're focused on the bigger picture and you're focused on others and legacy and life, that there is a way to do it. And that's why I actually think Christ, that is the highest moral aim, right? Mm-hmm. He met all of the vitriol in life, betrayal, hate, violence. He met it all with love and he met it with compassion. And that's why, like, regardless of if you believe that he actually lived or any of this, he is symbolic of the highest moral consciousness possible. And, Carl Jung would say that that was a suitable alternative to psychoanalysis, was actually setting your moral aim higher and striving towards it diligently. So, I mean, I agree completely. We need more of that in the Bitcoin space. We need more of that in the world, frankly.
In the world, yeah.
And these things, they're all intertwined. We touched on the beginning, all of us get to decide, but the world does influence kind of if we adopt fear or love. But it takes, I don't know, it takes good systems, and it takes, I guess, good leaders to set an example.
Yeah, I do believe that there's like individual people can have a ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I try to do, sort of embody I'm just one ant.
Yeah.
But one of the things I have faith in is, I'm trying to do that more. I know this is a podcast, but I'm trying to do less talking and more doing. I've been disappointed in myself, if I'm being honest, how much talking I've been doing, as opposed to, like in my own private life, I live the thing I talk about, but I also haven't created much, and I believe in the power of individuals that create stuff, like create an idea.
Yeah.
Through those individuals that try to create something new, the world progresses, and hopefully there's more and more of those people. So we mentioned kind of people who, what the Bitcoin community might call scammers. I have a lot of passions in my life that I focus a lot of my attention to. Bitcoin doesn't happen to be yet one of them. Bitcoin and cryptocurrency,
Glad you said yet.
I'm always looking for things to really fall in love with. So how is a person like me supposed to figure out, I also happen to have a platform a little bit, and how am I supposed to figure out what is an interesting set of ideas and what are not? Because people are financially tied into a lot of the cryptocurrencies that we're talking about, certainly with Bitcoin. Their livelihood, their well-being is tied up to it. So it becomes much more emotional, much more personal. It's no longer purely an exploration of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
It's really almost like a threat on your property. Like it's a personal threat. It makes it very difficult to explore those ideas. So I understand it, but it makes it very difficult for somebody like me to just walk in and be curious. So how do I proceed in this difficult world in exploring this landscape? And not give a platform to ideas that may harm others.
I guess first I'd like to commend your forthrightness about this, because I don't think many people try to walk that line necessarily. People, again, kind of the territorial imperative, they'll put whoever on that will help expand their reach.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Or say whatever needs to be said to expand their reach. So I think you're coming from a good place. I'll say that. There's a great piece written on the topic of scammers and scamming. I think it was by Goldstein. He wrote a piece called "Everyone's a Scammer," and it's sort of back to this, general human proclivity to try and get something for nothing always. Which again, it can be positive, it can be innovative, or it can be negative. It can be trying to steal from people.
Yeah.
That might be, I think that's a useful piece just to kind of see the crypto world through that lens. And that's how Bitcoiners are thinking all the time. They are by nature adversarial thinkers. So they're trying to minimize the need for trust in any situation and maximize verification. As far as sifting through the ideas, I guess this is back where the cultural immune system has some utility.
Yeah.
Because there were times when I thought this particular crypto asset, Augur was one I was really into, that it could facilitate prediction markets, and prediction markets could make markets more efficient, et cetera, et cetera. But when that investment thesis basically met the cultural filter or immune system, it forced me to reevaluate my position, forced me to really look into it more deeply. And through that exploration, I realized that it would need to be built on Bitcoin to work, basically. So, but it really comes down to like you doing your homework, but we can't all deeply evaluate every idea out there, right?
Yeah. One of the things I struggle with Alex Jones, for example, had dinner with him. That I could tell that would be a very fun conversation, but like then I also understand that there's like consequences to that conversation that should be explored with care.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to take on the responsibility of being a chef of the puffer fish and all those kinds of things. That said, just like you said, it's very difficult to know this ahead of time,
Mm-hmm.
and I will probably make mistakes, and that's a shitty thing to have to live with. That I'm going to make mistakes, and some of them very large. Like, yeah, I mean, I can imagine a bunch of different ways. But all we can do in this world is once we make the mistakes, we acknowledge those mistakes.
Yes. Learn.
And learn. And also, you know, I have to put this on the rest of us, that you don't take one thing that a person did and then burn them at the stake for
Mm-hmm.
it. That you realize that we all make mistakes, that a particular mistake does not make the person. And, you know, this applies to taking stuff out of context over, you know, hundreds of hours of talking, but it applies to actual, like, in context, big mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what if I murdered somebody at some point? Just give me a break. No, there are some things that are too far, of course, but in general, we need to give each other a chance. Yeah. But I walk with a heavy heart knowing that I'll probably make a mistake, especially one that I didn't mean to. That's the one that worries me most.
Well, this is human nature. Like hamartia, to miss the mark. That's the root word of sin. Like, we are sinful by nature. We can't help it. There's no way, again, pain is information, right? There's no way to learn other than trying, failing, learning. And then you put yourself in better formation, right? In
Yeah.
formation to better deal with it next time. So I hope, I don't get the sense that you're actually afraid of or of making a misstep. Like, I think you're just maybe disappointed is a better word. Like, you know, you're going to make the mistakes.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's
right?
a much, much better word.
But we have to embrace that.
Yeah.
That's the only way it's the only way we can advance. Is that we're dealing with an incomprehensible reality. All we can do is throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah.
And in that process, we're all, you know, inherently going to hurt ourselves and hurt others. And that's where love and forgiveness come into play, right? And yeah, I think the other thing is that this culture of reducing people down to a label, right? Whether it's racism or whether you're calling them a scammer or any number of terms, you're discounting their sovereignty to zero, right? You're taking a super complex human that is vast, contains multitudes, is changing over time, and you're trying to put them in a bucket of a word. And that is just, I think, a cognitive fallacy. Like, that's not only going to hurt the person that you're, you know, winnowing down to a word, but it's also going to hurt you. Mm-hmm. And it's going to, in your attempt to decomplexify reality by assigning this person to a term, you're actually going to create bad outcomes for yourself because you're not going to understand that person.
I do also think there's the failure of our social media technology that incentivizes that kind of reduction to a label. It's just the viral nature of that reduction. So it's not only do we humans naturally do that, our social media platforms make that easier, more fun, more effective to do that at scale, the mass hysteria. So I think there's actually like technological ways of adding friction to that.
Yeah, I wonder, I mean, I agree with you that social media is an amplifier to our natural way of dealing with one another. But I wonder, and my thinking has evolved a lot on this, that there's something below the way we're treating each other too, right? That we could say civilization sort of advances in the tools we make and the way we treat each other. We tend to have better tools, better quality of life, and better morality, better quality of living, and ways of dealing with one another. And I think that when you corrupt the money, that it really does push us the negative direction, pushes us away from, again, encouraging or magnifying scarcity artificially causes us to be more divisive. When things are more divisive, we tend to be less civilized, less nuanced, more, black or white, or this or that, or you're this, or you're label A or label B. So I really think, and this is a harder one to unravel, but I think if we can fix the money, right, which again is the base layer operating system for human moral action in the world, that it has downstream effects. So we'd actually maybe start to treat each other a little better on social media, despite the fact that it enables this faster communication.
That's interesting. So perhaps fixing like social media, as I've been thinking about, is treating the symptom, not the cause.
Yeah, that is the Bitcoin rabbit hole in a nutshell. Is that, they say fix the money, fix the world. You keep tracing these different social malaises or technological difficulties, lack of innovation. Weinstein's entire Portal podcast. Something went wrong in the early 70s. We went off the gold standard in 1971. And there's a great website, WTFhappened1971.com, goes through this whole gamut of socioeconomic data that's completely gone askew since the early 70s.
Yeah, you had this whole video. What do you think about Eric Weinstein and Bitcoin and the gold standard? And does he? I actually haven't heard him talk about his thesis about the 70s in connection to the going off of the gold standard. Yeah, what are your thoughts there? What are your thoughts about his general relationship with the Bitcoin idea and the community?
Yeah, the first exposure I had to Eric was I think it was his first episode with Peter Thiel. And they're going through that thesis that there's been this general institutional rot and suppression of innovation since the early 70s. And he's trying to identify what it is. I don't think they ever pinned it on the money, on going off the gold standard. But in recent interactions with Eric, I've interacted with him on Clubhouse. We recently released an episode of the show I did with Chris Espley, and it was titled Dear Eric Weinstein. So we're going through his worldview that he's expressed in the portal and tying it back to the money in different ways. And he's engaged. Eric retweeted the show. We've exchanged some messages. He's been very open-minded. He's asked some really good questions. So I get the sense that he's approaching this very wholeheartedly. He does bring with him his existing worldview and his existing theory. The one that really blew up was gauge theory. They got really popular. I don't know a lot about gauge theory. I actually messaged Eric and said I want to learn more, genuinely, because he seems to be serious that needs to be considered in the sphere of money, and so I want to learn more about it. But I think overall it's great. It's great to see an intellectual heavyweight of his caliber gravitating towards Bitcoin.
Yeah, he has some gauge theoretic conceptions about the world broadly, but also about economics, which ultimately boils down to just a set of mathematics which allows you to more effectively reason about the world. And he has a certain set of views there. So it's fascinating to see him grapple with it. I think he's also kind of like all of us, grappling with the idea of what is Bitcoin in this world. It's a very young technology, and it's unclear exactly how the ideas of the past fit with it.
Yeah.
Integrate, how the two integrate together. And so it's interesting to explore, not just Bitcoin, the particular. So for me, like what I've always saw Bitcoin as from the beginning, from a narrow worldview, is computer science, which is where I come from. And so I wasn't almost aware in the social, political, financial aspects of Bitcoin. But now I see that there's not just power, but there's fascinating ideas to explore on that side of things. Not just the computer science, not just the technical details, but the political, the socioeconomic, the philosophical.
Yeah. That's where I, find all the fascination in the world, frankly. I would one other thing about Weinstein and intellectuals more generally that are skeptical of Bitcoin, I would challenge them to read the book Human Action, written by Mises. I think in 1949 he published the English version. It's essentially the Bible of Austrian economics, and I think Austrian economics is a noticeable gap in most modern intellectuals' worldviews. That it's not taught in school. I mean, I have a master's degree in accounting and finance. Studied a lot of economics in school. There's not one peep of
Look at
Austrian
that.
econ.
The
Oh yeah,
elitist Breedlove talking about all the degrees he has.
I was a CPA. But it that curriculum that we get in college is noticeably deficient in Austrian economics,
Yeah.
and I think there's a reason why. Right? It's heavily government influenced. Um, Again, master's degree in accounting. They never taught me about what money is or where money comes from. All you learn is that the central bank issues money, and the central bank takes money away. So it's conceived of in the textbooks quite literally as God, right? An entity that suffers no opportunity cost, that basically is the foundation of the entire Keynesian worldview that you're taught in economics. And Austrian economics is the opposite end of the spectrum of that, right? It's actually the culmination, which economics is the youngest science in the world, by the way. So it is kind of it's the frontiers of science in many ways. Like to actually, when I say praxeology, many people have never even heard of that, but it's something. It's an a priori study equivalent to something like mathematics, that you're building things from first principles to reason about economic reality. And I think that book, it's a very difficult book written by Mises, 1,200 pages, translated from German. The way he wields English is fascinating and terrifying all at the same time. It'd probably take you 6 months to read it if you read it daily, seriously. Like it's a beast of a book. But that will plug the gap, I think, in any intellectual that's skeptical about Bitcoin. I think that will plug the gap that's necessary for you to see it in a new light.
Well, I'll take that as a challenge. Now that we took a little bit of a break, ate some good Texas brisket. Thank you for that, by the way. You brought some over.
You're quite welcome.
Let me ask the ridiculous question. At the core of the idea of Bitcoin is this guy or this entity named Satoshi Nakamoto. So the ridiculous question is, who is Satoshi Nakamoto? And first of all, is it you?
It's not me. I wish.
And is this an interesting question? Or is it just something about our human nature that always tends towards mystery?
Well, as we've touched on a bit today, mythology, in my opinion, is something that is intrinsic to how we see the world in a lot of ways. Like it's kind of the structure by which we build these useful fictions. And so in that way, you could just say that Satoshi is the godhead of Bitcoin, effectively. And I think a compelling argument could be made that his disappearance is what really solidifies Bitcoin's decentralization. Because if there were one individual to personally vilify or denigrate or attack, to disparage or question the motives of, if he's out in the Hollywood Hills partying, everyone knows he's got 1 million Bitcoin, it would just kind of tarnish the entire project in a lot of way. But the fact that on that theme, something for nothing, this guy actually gave humanity something for nothing. And it appears that he didn't profit in any way. He, she, or they. I actually heard recently that he identified as a he in some of his communications. So it sounds like it is a he.
See, like his communications being like studied, like almost like exactly as if he is a religious.
That's right.
Like a prophet.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to imagine that he's still alive and living in this world. Mm-hmm. And it's even more fascinating to imagine that he's perhaps participating in the Bitcoin community. Because, I mean, that takes a special human being to, out of principle, do that. To remain anonymous. That's very much the George Washington. Yeah, I always wonder, like, how many people are like that. There's a cliche that like absolute power corrupts. Absolutely, like power corrupts. But it seems like the progress of humanity depends on the people whom power doesn't corrupt.
Interesting.
And it's enough to have just a small selection of those.
Yeah.
And even if most of us are too weak, we give in to power if given
Yeah.
the chance. All it takes is a few.
I've never thought of it like that, but Marcus Aurelius immediately came to mind.
Yeah.
You know, the guy that he had the keys to the kingdom, and he apparently adhered to the Stoic virtues until the end. But yeah, I agree with Satoshi. The other thing that's interesting is he would be by far the most wealthy person in the world on a liquid asset basis because he has 1 million Bitcoin, which is 60 billion liquid net worth at current prices. So if he is still alive and just operating in the world, he is daily and moment to moment resisting massive incentives to go and just be the richest guy in the world.
He's the ultimate hodler.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's turning down not just financial success, but also fame.
Mhm.
I mean, fame is another drug. It's a kind of power, but it's in itself is also a drug, especially in this modern society, in this attention.
And he would have both.
He would have both.
Yeah.
It's fun to imagine who it could be. It's fascinating if it's somebody like you or somebody like Elon or somebody like that. That's fascinating to think about.
Yeah, I think Elon would be hilarious if he came out and he was Satoshi and be like, hey guys, I know I'm already the richest guy in the world, but got to go ahead and double my lead here.
What do you make of Elon Musk investing with Tesla, investing in Bitcoin, and maybe broaden it out in some of these other, big billionaires, but also people tied to major companies investing in Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think Michael Saylor really led the charge on that. So he's the CEO of MicroStrategy that I think they've acquired upwards of $2 billion in Bitcoin now, started acquiring August, maybe of 2020. And he's, personally bought a lot of it. He bought a lot as a treasury reserve asset for his company, MicroStrategy. Then they leveraged up on a convertible note and bought more. So he's really leading the charge in this Bitcoin institutional adoption.
Yeah, your conversation with him is a really interesting one. Your series of episodes, I suppose, but it's only a couple of conversations, I guess.
Yeah, we recorded twice, 5.5 hours each.
Yeah,
so it's about
nice.
11 hours of content. And yeah, thank you. It's a lot of people have said that it's the best first principle thing they've ever seen on Bitcoin, which I take no credit for that at all. I mean, I just sat down with a guy and unleashed him. He's just a beast.
Yeah. But it's fascinating that his long-term vision with it. I mean, I'm not sure I'm all philosophically bought in, but if he's right, if this set of ideas are as powerful as he describes, as you describe, that this would change the world. Which, as you say, it's funny that a company like MicroStrategy might be the company that has the biggest macro effect on our economy, on our world.
Yeah. The conversation reshaped my worldview a lot too, because he framed money as energy, which I had often thought of money as time. And it explored those connections a lot in my writing, but looking at it as energy, and then his supposition that the purpose of life is to basically channel energy across space and time. So we're just trying to figure out how to channel more energy across space and time toward the satisfaction of aims. And his definition, or his answer to that question, what is money, is that money is the highest form of energy a human being can channel. So it's a claim to all other forms of energy we can manifest in the world. And that just completely reshaped how I see it, brought in this whole other side to my intellectual explorations of money.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? So I understand money is time, which is in itself a really powerful idea. But money is energy and channeling energy. Can you break that apart?
Yeah. So I guess definitely have to check out the whole series to really get his perspective, but I'll do my best to condense it. Life itself, all forms of life are, they're dependent on energy, right? Energy fuels everything, fuels life and action and motion and all of that. And we could say that maybe like a plant is harnessing solar energy and then reallocating that into growth. So its aim is to grow towards the sun. All right. So it's allocating energy towards its goal of harnessing more solar energy, kind of thing. So, and humans too have evolved to figure out how to harness energy in different ways to satisfy higher and more complicated aims. So the original energy network that he referenced was fire. Right, we actually learned to wield fire as a tool in and of itself. So not only are we learning to channel energy, but we actually learn how to isolate energy as a tool in and of itself. And so we went into that, how harnessing fire had changed human beings. And actually, this is one of the earliest examples too of a coevolution between tool and our biology, because when we developed fire, we developed cooking. And cooking is, you can kind of think of it as pre-digestion in a way. We're liberating these macronutrients or making things that otherwise would not be digestible, edible. And it increases the efficiency by which we extract nutrients from food. That's what cooking does. So when we figured out cooking, we liberated all these digestive resources that were reallocated towards higher cognitive development. So there's this evolutionary path between figuring out fire and us becoming smarter, which was interesting. Some other early examples he went into were missiles and hydraulics. So missiles being, we learned to hunt at a distance. You know, we can't bring down a woolly mammoth maybe with spears and up close and personal force, but we could with spears and javelins and slings and whatnot. And then he went into how we've used water to channel hydraulic energy, so we can basically overcome gravity. We can move, you know, there's theories that the pyramids were constructed using, the blocks were moved using hydraulic energy or using water. Clearly we use like cargo ships and whatnot to move things much more efficiently across water than we could the land. So his whole view is how we keep figuring out better ways and more efficient ways to harness energy and channel it. And in that perspective, money has always represented a claim on all other forms of energy. So whatever energy couldn't be channeled towards something useful in the economy historically would go into gold mining. So gold became this residual, this token of the excess energy created by the market economy. And then you could take that token of energy and use it to redeem for any other form of energy or any other products of energy itself. So I guess it's my best approximation of it. And it just really shattered my worldview again, because I'd always thought about it as time. Like we spend time sacrificing to obtain money that we then redeem for commensurate sacrifices from others, but I'd never considered it purely as energy. And then it also ties back into gold, where there was an energy expenditure necessary to obtain gold. So there's a proof of work associated with obtaining gold that protected its market value, right? So you had to expend, again, if market value of gold's 2,000 an ounce, you had to expend 1,900 an ounce mining. So it kept producers honest in a way.
So do you think something like proof of stake, that's more about reputation than an actual exertion, like energy, can work?
No, I think proof of stake is inherently centralizing. It's like the old Matthew principle: from those who have, to those who have, more will be given. From those who have not, everything will be taken. That's what proof of stake is. You need proof of work to embody skin in the game in the marketplace, such that contributions are commensurate with consideration received. That's how systems work.
What's the idea why proof of work might incentivize decentralization? Like, do you worry that as Bitcoin becomes more powerful, it may become again more centralized?
Well, The decentralization of Bitcoin is largely driven by the nodes, actually, which aren't actually mining. They're just choosing which rule set to implement. Um, and then the mining network is actually enforcing that rule set. So I think the mining network is inherently decentralized in that really anyone with access to cheap energy can become a miner. You can freely enter or exit the market or the network at any time. Um, but maintaining the block size at a manageable level is what's key to maintaining node decentralization.
This is an interesting question. Who do you think has more power, the miners or the nodes? Because the nodes carry the idea of the protocol, like
Mm-hmm.
the specifics. So in some sense, they have more power. If Bitcoin is an idea,
They're
but
kind of
then
mutually indispensable, though, because you can't have, there's no security without the miners. So without the miners, Bitcoin is just an idea. And
yeah,
the idea of Bitcoin is maybe existed even before Bitcoin, right? Just sound money. We just say sound money as an idea. But there was no way to root that into thermodynamic reality without Satoshi figuring out not just proof of work, it's the entire composite of the difficulty adjustment, proof of work, one-way hashing, etc. So I don't know. That's hard to say. Hard to disentangle the two.
you've talked about money as morality too. How do you think about moral and immoral action in the context of money?
Hmm. There's this great quote by Rothbard, who's a famous Austrian economist. And he says, quote, "To be moral, an act must be free," unquote. And, I think morality, it changes over time, and it has its roots in biology. Um, Jordan Peterson makes the point that even animals have their own sort of pseudo morality, where, like, with wolf packs, for instance, if there's a dispute between the alpha males, or I guess between an alpha male and a incumbent, the two males will have a fight basically, and then when one it's decided that one has won, the loser will basically roll over and give up his neck to the alpha male. And they do this instead of fighting to the death, because in a wolf pack, they need every wolf so they can go out and bring down, you never know when you're going to need the 20th wolf to bring down the big buffalo the next day or whatever. So they've developed this less than fight to the death social morality to optimize their effectiveness as a wolf pack. Um, similarly for humans, like, our morality sort of emerges um, through competition and play. Even there are these implicit rules that come into place based on how we're organizing ourselves over time. And with so with money, it's interesting because most tools we would consider to be amoral, as in, a hammer can be used to build a house, which could be seen to be good, like a good constructive purpose, or it could be used to bash someone's skull, which could be something evil. And that the tool itself is amoral, doesn't have any independent morality of its own. All of the morality is associated with the wielder of the tool. So, what's the quote? Like, any tool can be a weapon if you hold it right, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But money's maybe a little bit different in that when you monopolize money, it's only useful as a tool for one thing, and that's for allocating wealth away from some and to others. So it is the only utility of monopolized money is theft. There's no other, there's a lot of propaganda out there that will say, oh, we need to print money to get out of this disaster, or to give to the poor, whatever moralistically camouflaged political aim is being discussed. At the base layer of monopolized money is that it's only useful for taking from some and giving to others. So another way to think about this is that money is a paper claim on the savings of society. So It is just a ticket for redeeming savings, which could be time, could be capital, could be knowledge from any market actor in the world. So it's kind of a list of who owns what, if you will. It's a proxy list. If there's one group that can amend that list and others cannot, then they're basically able and incented to modify that list to their own benefit. And that's effectively what a central bank is doing. So a central bank is determining how much money to create. They're also determining who gets to receive that money first. And the first recipients of that money are going to be the beneficiaries in an inflationary regime. So those that receive the money last are the ones being robbed. Those that receive the money first are the ones that are receiving the stolen proceeds, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And this has a really corrosive effect on social morality, because if we consider that people's time horizon, which the Austrians call the time preference, the more short-term thinking you are, the more likely you are to engage in selfish behavior, right? If you know that it's all over tomorrow, and you've been working your whole life to develop, this business or create this reputation or whatever your thing is, but you just are given the foreknowledge that tomorrow it's all going to end, you're much more likely to go out and just maybe get drunk and party that night because there's no more repercussions, right? Whereas if you know that you're going to live for a very long time, you're much more likely to plan for the future. And money is so we just say that your time horizon is closely related to your morality, right? The longer term thinking you are, the more moral you would tend to behave, the more you would care about long-term relationship building versus going out and getting wasted. And money too impinges very closely on our time preference. And again, time preference is the Austrian term. So low time preference means you're long-term oriented. High time preference means you're short-term oriented, which can be a little trippy for some people because it sounds backwards. But if your money constantly loses value, you are incentivized to become more short-term oriented. You are handicapped in your ability to plan for the future because your money, which is intended to be, here's another definition of money, as an insurance policy against uncertainty. So no matter what problems you encounter in the world, this money will best help you deal with those problems. Mm-hmm. When that insurance policy against uncertainty is injected with uncertainty, it's polluted with the uncertainty of inflation, your time horizon shrinks, your ability to plan long-term shrinks. And this impinges on social morality. So there's a great book on this called Honest Money by Gary North. And in that book, he gives the parable of the winemaker. And the winemaker, if we just imagine a hypothetical winemaker operating a business in a centrally banked economy, and let's say his central bank just doubled the money supply to quote unquote save the economy. Say it increased the money supply from $1 to $2 trillion. This winemaker that's accustomed to selling wine at $20 a bottle is now faced with basically three choices. And an important point here too, before we get into his three choices, are what prices are themselves. Prices are the most visible aspect of any service. So when you increase prices, you are incentivizing your customers to look elsewhere. Mm-hmm. They're going to look at your competition. When you decrease prices, you're incentivizing market actors to look closer at your product, right? You're delivering a solution at a lower price. So this winemaker that's accustomed to selling his wine at a $20 price point, all of a sudden, because of his central bank has tripled the money supply, he has three choices. He can either keep selling his bottle at $20 and all of his inputs will increase due to inflation by 50%. So he will lose 50% of his profit margin as a result. So he can choose to eat that loss. He can choose to double the selling price of his bottle of wine from $20 to $40 because all of the price of his inputs doubled. So then he would maintain his profit margin. Or the third one is that he could choose to water down his wine or use inferior ingredients. So he could use cheaper inputs and maintain the output at the same price. So he could basically start selling his customers an inferior product for the same price to preserve his profit margin. Now, again, case number one is not very palatable. He doesn't want to eat the economic loss. Case number two is not very good either, because he's then incentivizing all of his customers to go shop other winemakers if he doubles his price. So, human nature being what it is, trying to get something for nothing, inflation actually seeps into other industries by encouraging producers into option three, which is to deceive your customer in the short run. And again, this would be done initially at the margins. Maybe it's just a few drops of water. Maybe it's just some cheaper grapes. But over time, this inflation is actually inducing producers to weigh their financial well-being against their moral integrity. So it's forcing them into this dilemma that would not exist in a free market economy. And as they charge more money for wine that is inferior, the buyers of that wine, also living in a central banked economy, are also getting scammed by not only the inflation, but also the wine. So it becomes this kind of corrosive, contagious moral effect that propagates throughout an economy. And that's why I've argued in a lot of my writing that inflation is this infectious moral cancer on the world. I think it is tied back to a lot of the social strangeness we've seen in modern times, where, there seems to be a lot of fake people and a lot of fake businesses and a lot of scams, all of these things. I think it really is rooted in the money. And, Bitcoin, as the first money in history that has a 0% terminal inflation rate, or said differently, zero unexpected inflation. There's no theft integrated into Bitcoin. You can only earn it through work or sacrificing resources to obtain it. It is the antidote to this moral cancer that inflation riddles our society with.
Again, you're blowing my mind a little bit to think about the ripple effects of inflation, the way it seeps through our interactions. So at the early ripples is the effect it has on the products, on the dilution of the wine. But also it might have ripple effects on the character, on the behavior of people. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Artificial creation of scarcity, creating, having effects on society at the social fabric. Yeah. And I guess you're arguing the morality.
It's perverting free market dynamics, which again, we said free markets generate pragmatic truth. So inflation distorts price signals, which means it confuses capital allocation.
Yeah.
So we're trying to solve problems, but all of a sudden we can't tell if this price increase is a matter of true supply and demand change or a matter of policy change. So it clouds our economic perceptions. It suppresses innovation, because now you've exacerbated the boom and bust business cycle. People are going to overborrow and go into projects that they can't profitably sustain. So then there'll be a huge collapse. So that actually breaks the market's function of generating innovation. And then, I would argue too that it pollutes our pursuit of virtue, let's say.
Maybe it's pushing back, but I don't think so. It's not as clear to me, perhaps because I haven't thought about it deeply, that money is core to life and human interaction, because there might be other forces, other fraudulent forces, other things in human nature that are creating these effects as well. So it's clear, I think you're articulating really well, that there's these negative effects from inflation. I wonder if there's other not undiscovered, but ones we're not making explicit now, forces that are creating all the things we're seeing now with, like you said, cancel culture and all those things, but also the negative effects.